Dacher Keltner is an extraordinary social scientist from UC Berkeley. For many generations, psychologists and other social scientists primarily studied mental disease, ways in which people were suffering from mental illness, and tried to think of ways to cure them. But not long ago, about 20 or 30 years ago, this same group of people began to wonder about how people thrive. Like, how do ordinary people who aren't suffering from mental illness at that time begin to live richer and happier lives? And so Dacher Keltner was a part of a group of scientists who studied the science of happiness. How do we promote happiness in our lives? How do we build societies where it's easier to be happy? This project that he began 30 years ago has become and evolved in so many different ways. And this year he published a book called Awe, The New Science of Everyday Wonder and How It Can Transform Your Life. And it's a fascinating book. It's about awe, which is that experience of mystery and transcendence, where we step out of our ordinary, egotistical, self-centered view of the world and suddenly become and have a deep sense of ourselves as part of something much larger. Dacher Keltner and his colleagues studied people across many different cultures and characterized the different ways that we experience awe. The first that he mentions is when we witness an example of moral courage or kindness among people. Another example is experience what we have in nature. Another example is the way that music helps us to see beyond ourselves. He also writes about how collective effervescence, that experience of being part of a large group at a rock concert or in symphony, how when we're part of something big of other people, it lifts us out of our ordinary life. He also talks about how spiritual and religious practices cultivate an experience of awe, and most importantly, he talks about his own experience with his brother's death as being a moment when he experienced such a deep sense of awe that he decided that he wanted to study it more in depth. Now, there are many stories that you can hear and read about in your own life of people experiencing awe in nature at a beautiful sunrise or when they hear a perfect piece of music. But one of the most powerful stories that he tells in his book is the story of a young woman named Yuyi Morales. And when she was growing up in Mexico, she dreamed of people in far distant places, in other worlds. And when she grew up and she had a baby of her own, her baby was 2 months old, she and her husband decided that that baby should be able to meet the baby's grandfather, who lives here in San Francisco. And so they made a journey to come and present this young baby to the grandfather. One thing led to another, and it became impossible for them to return back to Mexico. And so she was, in effect, stranded here in San Francisco. A person who didn't speak English very well, who had a young baby, who was overwhelmed by the pace of life here in a totally different world than she had been prepared for in her whole life. And the story Dacher Keltner tells is about how she one day wandered into a library, and how a librarian took interest in her and began to introduce her to the world of books. Books which store so many different experiences of human awe, which move us. Libraries are one of my favorite places, and that's where she stumbled in. And she became so connected to the librarian, she began to draw drawings of her own imagination, things that she thought of in her imagination, and she wrote the words that went with them, and she began publishing children's books, and she became a very successful children's book author, even winning the Caldecott Medal. Many years later, she wrote a letter to that librarian to thank her for what the librarian had given her. And I want to read that letter because it was such a powerful letter to me. Hello, Nancy. Do you remember me? I could never forget you. True, at first, I might have been scared of you, guardian at your desk, and too close to the basket of baby books that my son always walked towards when we entered this unbelievable place, the children's book section of the Western Addition Public Library. At first, I might have been afraid of you. What if I made a mistake or broke the library rules? Would you tell us to leave the library because we didn't belong? Instead, one day, you talked to me in English I didn't quite understand, and before we knew it, you were giving Kelly a library card. I was puzzled. Kelly was barely 2 years old. How could he have anything? Today, Kelly is a 24-year-old lover of books. He also writes, and he often helps me review and correct my still imperfect English when I write the children's books I create. Books like the ones you put in my hands. Nancy, ever since the library became my home and books became my path for growth, you have been an amazing guardian. Thank you. I don't know where you are experiencing awe in your life, but I hope and pray that it will help you to be able to step out of the particularities of your circumstances today and to be able to feel a profound kinship with all people and all creation and God. My name is Malcolm Clemens Young. I'm the Dean of Grace Cathedral here in San Francisco, California. Thanks for watching More Good News.